Colleagues, thank you for joining today's Audit Committee, the first Audit Committee of the new post-election term, and so welcome everybody. Just to note that if I could ask members of the committee to introduce themselves when they're speaking for the web streaming purposes, obviously it's being streamed through Teams, and I don't think you can see us very well. I think if we look at the bottom corner picture visual of what the public can see, and so that we need to speak clearly and make sure the colleagues know who is speaking. So I'll just start with notice of recording the webcast. To advise the meeting tonight, this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and the members of the press public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. And then item 2, the appointment of the Audit Committee members, Chair and Deputy Chair. Firstly to note that the Council at its meeting on 24th of May 2022 appointed the Audit Committee Chair and members to serve on the committee for the period ending with the annual meeting of the City Council in 2023. From the Labour Group, myself, Councillor Fred Brunrod as Chair, Councillor Shabryan Hussain, Councillor Amar Khan, Councillor Miranda Perks and Councillor Shafiq Shah. From the Conservative Group, Councillor Marian Jenkins and Councillor Bruce Lyons, and from the Liberal Democrat Group, Councillor Paul Tilsley. We don't need apologies later, and therefore I need, as part 2 of that, to elect a Deputy Chair for the purpose of substitution if the Chair absent for the period ending with the annual meeting of the City Council in 2023. And I would like to nominate Councillor Paul Tilsley for that role. We agree.
I'm the Chairman's casting vote. That took a minute to sink in.
Thank you.
I voted against myself.
So therefore, we'll take that Councillor Paul Tilsley is elected as Deputy Chair. Okay, so then I'll move on to item 3, to note the committee's functions as set out in the attached schedule, which was previously provided in the papers, and to include an introduction to the Audit Committee's independent advisor, Andrew Hardingham, who is joining us online today. Andrew is, as part of the City Council's constitution, the committee now is required to have an independent advisor to advise members and support members in terms of the functions of the committee. So I'd like to ask Andrew to say a few words and introduce a little bit about what his role is, and particularly for our new members of the committee, about what the role of the committee is. Over to you, Andrew.
Good morning, members. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If somebody could just wave, it would be really good to see if you can hear me. Yes, great. I can see an arm waving in the distance. So I'm sorry I can't be with you today. I just had a diary clash that was impossible to avoid. But I do hope to travel to Birmingham for the next committee. So hopefully I have a bit of an opportunity to meet you as individuals on new members to the committee and as a committee together. And at least we can say a real hello rather than a virtual hello. It's been a pleasure to work with the chair and the previous committee for part of last municipal year. As I say, I was appointed to provide some advice and support to the chair and to the committee as an independent person. So I'm not a member of the committee. I'm somebody to help and advise the committee, be a sounding board for members if you just want to speak to me and ask me any questions that you just have about the operation of the committee. I've just put a couple of slides into your pack this morning. I'm not going to read them out to you, but they're there just to give you a little bit of background into me, so that you can understand that I've worked within local government for a number of years at senior levels within two unitary authorities, and I've worked with audit committees, worked with local authority companies. So that's a little bit about me, former 151 officer, semi-retired. My wife would argue with that, but there you go. I've also set out for you, and in the next 2 slides, two thoughts really about the purpose of an audit committee, and I've quoted there from Sit for Guidance the purpose of what you as a set of members are charged to do, provide those charged with governance. It's sort of quite quaint language, but those charged with governance are elected members of the organisation. Your responsibility is to govern the City of Birmingham, and as such, you as members of the audit committee are there to provide the rest of the elected members for Birmingham City Council with that assurance around the points that is in that statement. The second slide in your pack, or the third slide in your pack, just helps to point out for you where I think your main areas of responsibility are. You probably know all this anyway, but it's just good just to have them documented and just to reflect on them. Your main areas of responsibility is providing that assurance around good governance across the City Council, in terms of receiving reports from internal audit and external audit and making sure that you understand the recommendations and that the council is following through on those. It's around the risk management framework, the assurance framework, and I've listed the other points there: financial reporting, counter fraud and governance, and also to respond to requests from any of your statutory officers if they are so minded to make those. Those are your main areas of responsibility. You've got in your pack the terms of reference, and we can explore those either individually if any of you got any questions about this, and I'll send an email around after this meeting with my contact details, telephone number, email, and then you can get hold of me if you want to. I think the one difficult thing that I sort of find members across the country grapple with is that as elected members, you're elected with a political mandate, but the audit committee, I would ask you to try and put down your political mandate and work for the good of the city to achieve or to deliver what you're charged to deliver, and not to bring sort of politics into it, but to look at it in the round. You're there to provide those charged with governance, as I say. So it really is quite difficult to separate out your political role from this audit sort of role. But if you can, in terms of what you're trying to think about the good of the city, and that's the predominant role. Now, that may be challenging, it may be difficult, but I think that's one of the things that as members of the committee, you need really to start to think about. And if you want to follow that up with me, challenge me on that, then when I send you my details, we can do so. So I'm here to help. I'm here to be a sounding board. I'm here to help you understand your role and to be effective in your duties as the audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I would like to reiterate the support that Andrew's been to the committee in the previous year, and I would encourage members, particularly those members who haven't been on the committee before, to have a conversation with Andrew and to get to know him, and any areas of interest that you have and wish to pursue. Andrew will be within this committee. Andrew will be able to support you, and that point of being as apolitical as we can be as elected members is a really important one. I don't know if any members had any questions or any points they wanted to raise for Andrew.
I think possibly at the next meeting it might be helpful if Andrew could be heard, that we could have a private session.
Yes, I think that would be useful. I think if we could do that as an action, so perhaps have half an hour before the meeting to talk through with Andrew, that would be helpful, Councillor Johnson. Thank you. If we could make that as an action. Okay, I then move on to item 4, declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. And before I just also, I'd like to hand over to the City Solicitors to make a couple of comments, because I know that one of the things that we wanted to get this clear.
Thank you, Chair. So, and this is particularly for the benefit of new members of this committee. I'm just going to take you through very broadly from the Constitution what the Constitution sets out in terms of this committee's membership, what it says in relation to conflicts of interest. So, members of the Audit Committee, its chair are appointed by full council. There are 8 members of the committee, and the quorum is 3. The chair of Audit Committee should not be appointed to serve as a director on any of the council's wholly owned companies. So that's a restriction when it comes to whichever member takes the chair for this committee. In terms of conflicts of interests, if a cabinet advisor or former cabinet advisor is a member of the audit committee, when it is considering matters to which their roles relate, so that's their role as a cabinet advisor, then that councillor must withdraw from the meeting during the consideration of that matter. Also, when it comes to restrictions, the audit committee, when it's considering items relating to the work of a relative or family member of the committee, then that councillor must withdraw from the meeting when the committee is considering that work matter. Finally, I just want to end on and make it clear and clarify, there are no restrictions in terms of membership of this committee when it comes to those members who also sit on an ONS committee. I hope that helps members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. T.
The latter point was specifically amended in the Constitution 18 months ago.
Yes, it was. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. In which case, can I ask if members have any further questions? No problems, none given. And then I move on to item 5, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Jenkins and Councillor Perks.
Yes, that's going straight.
Yes. So we'll take apologies from that. Case. I know the Councillor Shah is it made these this thing over the deputy still from there. So that has well, we will take those apologies. Exempt information, item 6, exempt information, exposure of the press and public. Consider whether any matter on the agenda contains exempt information within the meaning of section 100L of the Local Government Act 1972, where it is considered that the public interest in disclosing the information, the reasons outlined in the report. If so, to formally pass the following resolution. Resolved that in accordance with Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006, the public be excluded from the meeting for consideration of those parts of the agenda designated as exempt on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business transacted, the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the press and public were present, there was disclosure to them of exempt information. I don't believe we have any requests for private information, though obviously members can request to move into private session should that be consideration. So can we formally pass that resolution that needs to occur move straight into that? Can I get that? Thank you. So item number 7, minutes. Of the Audit Committee, 26th of April and 30th of May, which was an extraordinary meeting of the committee. Those are to follow.
Chair, if I can just add really quickly, I clerked those 2 meetings in Mandeep's absence, and due to other work commitments and clashes, I couldn't turn them around in time for this meeting, but I'll resolve to get those in front of the committee at your next meeting in July. So thank you for that meeting. Apologies.
Fully understandable and appreciate it. Okay, in which case, item 8, the Cabinet Member for Transport Portfolio. Welcome, Councillor Clements. Thank you for coming and joining us today. And firstly, congratulations on your appointment to the role. The committee moved to a couple of years ago now, I think it was, for those there, to an assurance system where we basically invite cabinet members to come in front of the committee to talk about assurance, risk, and any other audit considerations within their portfolio, to give a presentation to the committee, and then to have, to enable the committee members to ask questions with regard to the portfolio. With that aim of getting that assurance that we can then pass on to the rest of the members of the council as part of our role. So we do this on a rotating basis as part of our meeting agendas, and welcome Councillor Clements to this meeting, as I said. So the kind of format is for you to give an opportunity for you to give a bit of a presentation on things that you'd like the committee to consider, and then we've been provided with an assurance document from the internal audit team to highlight the areas that of your portfolio that are included in the annual governance statement, anything that was raised in the external auditor's report, and any other issues that may be of interest to the committee. And members are then invited to ask questions from that report and indeed from your presentation. So, if you, Councillor Cummings.
Thanks very much, Councillor Greenrod, and thanks very much for the invitation to attend this morning and update the Audit Committee on the portfolio risks and assurances. It's great to be here. It's a really important committee, so it's important that you hold us to account. So we've got a slide deck, I'd say a good slide deck, concise, well-structured slide deck covering the risks and assurances. So I'm just going to speak briefly at the beginning and then hand over to Kevin and Phil to go through the details. And I think that the first thing I want to just alert you to is that the scope of the portfolio has changed in comparison to Councillor Zappa, who was my predecessor and set some very, very strong foundations. But my portfolio is now transport. So I'm not covering the climate change issues that Councillor Zappa was addressing. So we'll come on to this in the presentation, but I have responsibility for transport strategies, highways, advice to the planning committee, and air quality. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been going through an intense phase of induction briefings, and at the stage when we had some preparatory meetings for this session this morning, I was personally very reassured because all of the issues that we're going to flag this morning had already been highlighted in the induction meetings that I have had over the last 4 or 5 weeks. And obviously, you know, that there are some big issues that are there which we already addressed in our assurance statements, and issues that have been raised by the external auditor. They cover things like staffing and the PFI negotiations, which I'm going to leave Kevin and Phil to talk about. But I think that we've got many challenges ahead, but very robust plans to deal with them. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to the two ADs to take this forward.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Chair. I'll lead off, and then we'll, as ever, do a bit of a double act with Phil about particularly the issues that are in our respective assurance statement. So just again, one other thing that's changed from last time we addressed the committee on assurances, risks and assurances. Formerly now, Highways has moved as a service within Directorate to City Operations. We used to be, me and Phil, in the same Directorate under Inclusive Growth. We've now moved into City Operations Director under Rob James, and Phil and Transportation and Connectivity is within Place Prosperity and Sustainability under Paul Kitson. So moving forward, it will be 2 different assurance statements, whereas previously it being the same one, but nevertheless still in the same cabinet member, same portfolio. So bringing in the same issues and risks that we're picking up in the assurance statement. So there were 4 actually in the assurance statement that we wanted to highlight, and we were asked to highlight. We distilled those down to three really in terms of the key themes, and staffing runs through all of them. I'll briefly talk about parking services when I let Phil just develop a little bit on the clean air zone item there, and then we'll both come back on an item which we addressed the committee about last year, again, which is the difficulty with recruitment and retention of staff, particularly professional staff and engineers. So yeah, the first one just on parking services, and we highlighted within the assurance statement that what we know is coming next year, what is potentially coming from government next year, is devolved powers around potentially expanding our existing enforcement powers on parking to include for obstructed parking. So at the moment, all we do is enforce things where we've got double yellow lines and markings and restrictions on the ground. There is a movement by government to devolve powers to all local authorities outside of London. London have had the powers for many years for obstructed parking. So effectively, where we say at the moment there's no restrictions, but we can't enforce it. The government again is looking to devolve those powers to the remaining local authorities outside London next year. Still waiting on confirmation of that. As we are with what I'll go to next, which is the issue of moving traffic offences. So again, very much what we're hearing from government and DFT is that they will look to devolve moving traffic offence contraventions to local authorities outside London. Again, something that's been in London for many years, but will be government to look to devolve those powers out to local authorities next year. And then there is also what has been moved in some of the DFT Communication and correspondence we've had is potentially looking at speed camera enforcement being devolved to local authorities or shifted to local authorities, because currently it sits with the police to enforce that. So there's a number of things there that we've got our eye on that we can see are coming next year that will cause massive increase in the amount of work that I have to do on the operational side of parking enforcement and traffic enforcement on that side, but also impacts for Phil in his area in terms of delivering new schemes to support that and to support those additional powers. So we're flagging up that I'll certainly need a service restructure that will take into account the fact that we will need more staff and perhaps different areas of staff and a different focus on the way the staff structures set out in order to enable us to deliver that. So that's the parking service element. A lot of unknowns there at the minute, but something that we're building up as a service, options, and that we can potentially look at as a structure for dealing with those issues if and when they come along. So, Phil, just on the clean air, okay?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everyone. So, clearly, with the assurance statements, they are generally written at this point in time. So, this was at the end there of February, March. So the item around has clean air zone contributed by new members, so to speak jargon, please put me up on that. The clean air zone team set up a 3-year fixed term contract basis. So the returning members will be aware there are a number of delays with the CAS, not least firstly the vehicle checker issue with government, and then some matter of COVID where officers within the council and the civil service were redeployed in terms of dealing with that crisis at the time. So a number of the staff were appointed on 3-year fixed term contracts. Those are coming towards an end. So going back to the broader context, Kevin was starting to allude to, we need to secure those officers in those roles for the continuation of that programme. And this isn't about us just flagging the risks. Clearly, we're here to tell you what we're doing about it. So I've already actually taken action now around a number of the posts using the workforce review board process that Sarah and others are aware of in terms of the governance to actually appoint a number of those members of the team on a permanent basis, including Steve Arnold, who's the head of that service. Clearly, there are some roles which were important in setting up the clean air zone, which we no longer need, but where the focus is now moving to meeting the cabinet member after this meeting around priorities for the coming municipal year. It's particularly about the wider piece on clean air. The previous cabinet member was very clear that it wasn't about just achieving compliance, it was actually going beyond that in terms of civic health inequalities we see from air quality across the city. So at the moment, I've already appointed, as I say, a number of those staff on permanent contracts. The key piece, as we move on perhaps into the next item, is just the state of the market in terms of not only engineering professional roles, it gets into town planning, project management, finance, legal, and we've all seen the national pictures at the moment with, a lot of vacant jobs, unemployment is very low, but myself and Kevin do operate, pre-COVID and pre-Brexit in a very competitive industry where there's a lot of competition in the public sector, the local authorities, HS2, government departments, combined authority, and then there is a massive private sector business around transport, highways, planning, multidisciplinary consultancy. So it's great to see the BXE moving to Birmingham. It's great to see Dealer coming to Wolverhampton, but it is an extremely, hot market for good resource. And effectively, we need the right capacity and capability to deliver what is a very busy, ambitious portfolio of work. Again, we're not sitting on our hands regarding this. We are looking, as we said last year, getting apprentices through the apprenticeship levy, getting the youngsters in, graduates. We very much flex our supply chains. We've got a number of frameworks to resource staff and commissions into the organisation. What I would say is our suppliers, I'm sure Kevin will support me on this, our suppliers are also having the same challenges. So it's not just a matter, we go to our framework, we look to get human resources or project resources. There is a real struggle to actually provide across the piece. So we're looking at that, and certainly within my area, and I'm sure we'll move on to Kevin's in due course, working with our new people partner, I think it's the correct terminology now, we're looking to do quite a targeted campaign using some HR specialists to try and get out into the market, try and reach different places that perhaps we haven't done before, to try and attract new resources. We've also got the Commonwealth Games, which you can imagine being pretty involved in. There will be staff working in a number of organisations, working at Games at the moment, who come August will be looking for a new role. We're trying to land that to go live around August time. And then in the background, we've also had approved through the employee governance group, it's called EGG, a range of market supplements, particularly focused on the engineering sector. And in those teams, the justification there is we've had 3 or 4 completely failed recruitments where, just to give you an indication, almost half my engineering service at the moment is vacant. So we're having to obviously use external support there, but that justification to get supplements isn't given widely, to be totally frank. But there is an evidence pattern over a number of years and a number of failed recruitments to justify that intervention. Chair, we'll be happy to report back by this committee, and I'm sure our Sustainability and Transport Committee about the success that we have with that. So I'll pause there. That's okay. I don't think Kevin wants to.
No, I'm chipping anything else. No, so we know what the issues are. I agree with that. Obviously, everything you just said there. I think a couple of things I'll expand on from our perspective. Yeah, we certainly had failed recruitments, particularly in our highway asset management team. Incredible difficulty, as you say. This is it's something that the sector's got an issue with, particularly when you're looking for good qualified engineers that are able to, because they need to be qualified. We need engineers with charter status to do particular tasks and roles. And what the demand for chartered engineers at the moment is through the roof, and therefore the salaries that we're paying to for those roles just aren't attracting those big. So we've got to get a referral recruitment on in our highway asset management team as well. I think the growing your own thing, as Phil said, is something around graduates and apprentices that we've been very keen to do. I think we've been very fortunate, probably both me and Phil, in the ones that we've had. I think, and I think we're very good at potentially attracting particularly apprentices. I think the challenge now that we're putting back to human resources, and Phil says through our people partners, is around the pathway for keeping them in the authority once their apprenticeships come to an end. That's been far more of a challenge, and as I say, we've worked our way through that, but that's been, I think, something we've had to create for ourselves rather than say it's having any real corporate direction. What we do with apprentices at the end of their tenure, and just so finally, the other bit of work that is being done that Phil and I were talking about the other day on a more regional and national level. There's a forum called ADEPT, which is, I forget what it stands for now, Phil, but it's basically the Association of Directors of Planning and Transport. And obviously this isn't something, going back to the sort of broader sort of profession picture, this is something that's affected all local authorities at the moment. So again, ADEPT are doing a piece of work that Phil's tied into as our representative from the council there about how local authorities generally across the region looking to challenge that, what they're looking to do in terms of incentivising apprentices and graduates, but also again we're talking about recruitment a lot. I think our issue more generally, or just as important, is about retention of those individuals and those valued individuals. So again, a lot of work being done at a regional, national level on the across the professional level as well, but we're tying into.
Can I just interject briefly, just going back to some of the things that you were talking about at the beginning of your comments, Kevin, on the parking spaces and the devolution of the effective houses. Obviously, they are, that's going to present us with a challenge, and it is a risk, around the need to be able to the starting to meet that capacity need. But actually, in terms of local members, actually the fact that we can get those powers is from my perspective, is a good news story, because from my years as being security chair, and the fact that we're getting some powers to address obstructed parking on pavements and grass verges is something that members have absolutely been lobbying for years. So yes, it's going to present us with all sorts of challenges, but it's something that I know from that 4-year period on the Scrutiny Committee, it's one of the top issues for local members, because it's one of the things that most annoys our residents. Similarly, so what's the other thing that's been devolved?
Moving traffic offences.
Traffic offences, yeah. And again, on the again, yesterday I was meeting with local members, we were talking about speed cameras and the difficulty with moving forward on any further average speed cameras at the moment is that currently that's only a police enforcement matter. And there's also some budget issues as far as I understand it. But again, just in my inbox in the first 5 or 6 weeks, that most of the requests have been about obstructed parking and speeding and the dangers from the road. So actually having those powers ourselves will give us more scope to act and actually tackle some of the road safety issues and move towards Vision Zero. Because again, I attended a local meeting with the police last night, and unfortunately, the top item that the police had to report was a road death on Herschel Road in mine and Councillor Greenwald's ward. And I don't want to go to any more meetings when we're talking about fatalities on the road. So having some more powers over the traffic offence and the average speed cameras, I think would be a good thing. But it presents us with all those risks that Kevin's outlined.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Cabinet member is saying, I think that powers are something that, as a set of local authorities across the country, we've been clamouring for many years. But as you say, that comes with the fact that it's only going to be delivered properly well if we properly resource it and are able to properly resource the delivery of those functions. So yeah, absolutely something that we've been, your predecessors have written several times to the FT to request those powers. And hopefully they come next year, but as you say, we've just got to deal with the risks to actually deliver what's being given to us. So.
Thank you, colleagues. Well, I very much appreciate that presentation.
I've got one more slide. I literally have one more slide, Chair, and that's okay. Because I should have said at the start, I'm just picking up 2 elements of this presentation, and this is the final slide, honestly. As the Cabinet said, it is very brief. 2 things we're picking up, just what's in our assurance statement, which was the first slide, and then just we mentioned the external recommendations related to the highways PFI. So again, something that's been at this committee previously, but again for new members, highways PFI is the 25-year deal that we have with ourselves, the DFT, and we've got an SPV, a service provider, effectively in the shape of a company called Highways Limited, who then contract to a company who now everybody around the table knows Kia. So that's the relationship, and they're there to deliver a set of highway services. The ones you see every day, fixing lights, hot arms, pruning trees, etc., and also to deliver a hefty amount of investment into the network in terms of road reconstruction, road resurfacing, replacement of street lighting columns. So what people would call a capital investment side of it, and then obviously 25 years of revenue services, as we call operational services, keeping the highway managed and maintained. So that's the broad part of it. So, and again, a very brief history, Chair, so I won't dwell too long on it.
We are new members of the committee, so
it's difficult to keep this one brief because it does have a rich history, but effectively we had Amy in from 2010 when we awarded the project. We had Amy as that subcontractor that I've talked about. Very well publicised difficulties with Amy in terms of their approach and behaviour on the contract, which ended up in a couple of very high profile court cases, which ended in 2019. We got the right side of the decision, Court of Appeal. Amy asked to leave the contract on the basis that we could no longer deliver it on those terms, and had to compensate the council for the basis of this conversation to the tune of £215 million to do that, to exit the contract. So as they exited the contract, we brought in Kiers as what's called, and it's referred to in this slide as the interim services contractor. So Kier are in the moment on an interim basis until August 2023 to deliver a set of services while we re-procure the PFI contract in the market. So at the moment we're dealing with it on a cost reimbursable basis. Kier get paid for what we do. We're just going through the re-procurement at the moment with bidder state with 2 bidders, one of which is Kier, the other which is called SNC Lavalin. This side of the Atlantic, better known as Atkins. So that's the procurement phase in a minute, but the idea that by August 23, that procurement is finished, we're back into a PFI that takes us through to the remainder of that 25-year contract, which ends in 2035. We carry on delivering those services and that investment on a PFI basis, which, coming to this slide, and a couple of the items in here allude to this, that is all around pushing risk out to the private sector to deliver those services and that investment as much as we can, and getting the benefit of that private sector input and value
So there's more risk pushed to them to deliver a set of services that we set out for them to start. So that's the principle of it. Jumping very quickly therefore to the audit recommendations that you got in front of us. There were 5 audit recommendations from external audit at Grant Thornton. I don't think it is it finalised yet, Sarah? Sorry, the Grant Thornton.
The volume money.
Okay. But these are the 5 recommendations that we responded to in terms of what came out of the external audit report by Grant Thornton earlier this year. The first is around, so I'll run through it very briefly, Chair, and happy to take any questions after that. The first was around, there was a comment or criticism about the decision to extend the interim services contract, which apparently the extended as the procurement phase got longer. Our response to that was, strictly speaking, this isn't our procurement. This is Burnham Highways Limited procurement of their subcontractor. So there's very little control we have over the time of that. But again, we've supported that extension by BHL through cabinet decisions. So that was the first point. The next one was just on strengthening the governance arrangements, which again we accepted in part, and we've moved to a different governance arrangement now as the second bullet point on that block described, which is things like establishing a sponsoring board, which the cabinet member and the cabinet member for finance sit on, and also Becky Hellard sits on it, and Rob James is the director in terms of board members. So they have oversight of key decisions that are being made within the project, and that's one element that we provided in terms of answering that recommendation. More formal processes with the government departments, I think that was accepted, whilst there was a lot of exchange, particularly with the FT and Treasury, on aspects as we went forward over the last 2 years on the re-procurement and exiting and interim services and what comes next. There was probably not enough done in terms of formal letters to government to confirm their position. So I think that was the comment and recommendation there. I think we've acknowledged that, and we're now writing more formally the DFT more regularly on that basis. Business case training for officers. As we said, we didn't completely accept that, not least because we do have, that's the second bullet point there, it says we do have external advisors who are very competent in submitting business cases to government, very experienced in that, who delivered those things for us. And also we did confirm at every stage, again with the DFT, that the business case we were submitting was in line with their requirements, which it was. So yes, we have said we'll develop further training on certain aspects of it, but the point and the pushback on that is that it wouldn't make any difference in terms of the outcome of anybody's decision on a business case. And the final one, which is around scenario planning for road use, we're not really clear on what's meant from the auditor on this one. And I think if I'm honest, they're probably overstretching their technical understanding of condition surveys and how we assess roads. So we are waiting for some further information from the external auditor about what is meant by this recommendation. But ultimately, if they're going back to the risk part of PFIs, is in terms of the condition and potential scenario planning, for instance, if there's more or less traffic using the network, that risk is, if there's only one car or a million cars using it, that is part of this is about pushing that risk over to the contractor, the service provider to deal with rather than us. So scenario planning for us isn't really something that we would take on in terms of whether there's more or less traffic using the road. So, but we'll wait to see what clarifications on that. We haven't had it yet. So they're the 5 recommendations. We responded to them all, Chair. So again, so happy to take any questions at that point. That's the final slide. If anybody wants me to put any of the other ones back up to the reference, I'll do that.
Thank you, officers, and thank you, Councillor Clement, for that very helpful presentation. I'm aware that the external auditor perhaps wanted to come in and it's available online for us. So, John, did you want to really make a comment? Can we see you? Do we need to kind of sort of move?
Yeah, I can. You should be able to hear me, Chair.
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, and thank you for that response. I think we welcome that response. Just to particularly for new members who won't have been aware of the background to our audit work here. The previous year we had qualified our VFM conclusion regarding this issue, so it was a much higher sort of tariff for finding, if you like, from our audit. This year we recognised the progress being made around this whole issue and also the difficulty of the issue. The recommendations that we make on them are graded as improvement recommendations, not key recommendations, which again is a lower level of priority from an external auditor. So I just wanted to make sure that you got that context, that we were saying that these were, in our view, recommendations for the council to consider based on best practice, but not ones that we would sort of die in a ditch over, if you like. In terms of the last one, and we did use a specialist team of PFI specialists with experience in them, particularly in the highways sector here, and their comment was around scenario planning based on the changes to road usage, so modelling different assumptions, different scenarios around different patterns of road usage. I have to say I haven't had that query back to me, and I am aware that the one specialist that led our work in this area has left the firm. So whether we've missed that clarification, please do send it to me, and we'll make sure we give you a fulsome response on it.
Yeah, no problem. We can do that. Yeah.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that clarification. So in which case I will move to questions from members. I'm just going to take the chair's prerogative and ask the first question. One of the things that I'm becoming increasingly aware is a risk is the relationship with DFT. I mean, in some of the recommendations here we've seen about how we relate to DFT, and it's really good to hear how you have worked on that and ensured that we are overcoming these issues. But as Councillor Clements highlighted, it's likely that we're hopefully positively going to experience further devolution of powers from DFT to ourselves. The challenge I've got is that DFT, that relationship is important because we need to ensure that when we are taking on new tasks, actions, activities, we need to be resourced effectively to do that. And we don't need to see that what's currently a problem, those at the DFT level, suddenly comes down, and instead of it being their fault, it's ours. I'm also aware that with regard to some of the positive interventions that we've done around low traffic places for people, DFT budgets came down with incredibly tight deadlines, incredibly kind of almost ruthless attempts at us to deliver within timescales that were difficult. We did our best, and I think we did deliver positive responses, but it did feel like our hands were being tied by DFT's almost draconian kind of rules. And we've seen in other councils where projects that were being developed with consideration and time were being ripped up because DFT decided that deadlines were their prerogative and not the councils to deliver for their residents. So I'm interested in that. I think for me, and having followed this narrative as well, there's a risk around DFT and how it engages with Birmingham City Council, and particularly about how many responsibilities are taken on and whether we resource them properly. So I'm wondering if that's my first kind of question. How much of a risk is the relationship with DFT? How do we build it better? And how do we ensure that when we take on new powers, new projects, new initiatives, we are making sure that we are in firm control of what's happening and not beholden to the whims of perhaps a DFT minister?
So I think, there's probably two or three things there. I'll do the specific perhaps relationship in what we've done with PFI, say that's part of the recommendation. That's still always come back and think about the other issues you raised there, particularly around the evolution from grant applications and that sort of thing. I think firstly to say the relationship with the DFT throughout all even in the sort of Amy exiting times has been extremely strong. So I think the engagement and very good relationships, particularly at an officer level, my level and beneath in terms of getting, has been extremely good. The DFT are extremely receptive to all our requests for input and support. I think, I'd say the recommendation is around putting some of that on a more formal because I think a lot of that interaction happens and has happened consistently across the piece. Putting someone on a formal footing at the right level. So, for instance, again, the investment committee that is the DFT's, if you like, decision-making committee. When decisions are made on that now related to the PFI, in attendance there will be Rob Jones, my director, and a guy called Bob Wiggins, who's the chairman of the Harvest Limited. They will be in attendance for those discussions and decisions with DFT, with Emma Ward, who's the permanent tribal secretary, DG. So that sort of level of involvement now is what really this recommendations about that stepped up off the back of over the last 12 to 18 months in terms of those improvements reporting. So, but I would say the relationships are very good. I think the thing we're trying to strengthen up with them still now, and it probably does come down to the point we're just making there around PFIs not being, the government has been very clear, there's no PFIs in that name anymore. Then maybe there's a diminishing understanding and expertise around PFI within those who are dealing with the DFT. I think that's where we're pushing a little bit at the moment on some clarification points on procurement as we go forward. And I think that's the area that we're pushing in terms of the relationship. And there are others involved with that, so particularly we've got the IPA as part of it. The Treasury, they have far more insight into how PFIs operate, what some of the issues are that we've got going forward with it. So we're spending more time now trying to get into people in the IPA and Treasury who are ultimately making those decisions rather than the people dealing directly with DFT. So, but yeah, relationship has always been good. It's about just putting it on the right level, particularly in this sort of sponsorship or strategic level. So I think that's my response on the PFI side of it. Still on the grant applications.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. As Chair was saying, I think particularly looking at the active travel funding, emergency active travel, we had, per the guidance, 8 weeks to deliver the measures that we did. I think we did do it in the 8 weeks. A couple spilled over in 10. But yeah, that is a pretty incredible performance within local government. It's going to mobilise during a pandemic, in my hands, to get those schemes on the ground. I've certainly had further conversations, I should say, Person Kevin was referring to Emma Ward, who's the DG of DFT, who I think acknowledged, I think it's fair to say that a lot of pressure had been placed on local authorities to actually deliver. And some of the issues we had, in particular, as you're aware, around consultation. Not only doing a consultation, but we had to do it in an expedient and different way to what members of the public usually recognise as a council process, and that created a lot of issues. I've never, other than the Clean Air Zone, I've never seen so much correspondence. It was getting to the point of being able to cope with the family committee. The relationships overall in the DFT are pretty good. We do have a lot of contacts, but at the moment, there has been, through the city regional settlement, there's been a big impact settlement to the region. If I told you officers working at TFWM and other colleagues in the region spent, I think, the first round as a holiday doing it, and then it's included over Christmas. So we fed this back because, let's be honest, it's sort of seen the break every now. So, but at the same token, we've backed a significant amount of investment for the region, which will take forward key sustainable transport policies and agendas. I just think there's, like everything, I think there needs to be a little bit more understanding and empathy from government about how actually local authority works, because a lot of civil servants, if I'm being honest, have never worked in local government. They don't know the governance, they don't know the consultation, and vice versa. I've never worked in the civil service, so I'm sure they have other challenges that we're not aware of.
Early in my career, I was an audit sector or really significant looking civil service roles. My observations of my officers in the last maybe 6 weeks, I think we've got a very good thing at building constructive working relationships and nurturing them. And I think that you've got to inspire confidence in your partner. And I think that these two gentlemen do that at their staff. And I think there's been a lot of learning from the push on active travel. Yes, we need to get better and smarter at doing the consultation, but there are things there that simply have not happened. under the conventional arrangements, and actually push forward in a lot of our own policy objectives, which are about making people consider whether they travel around Birmingham and consider mode shift. So I think we should actually give the DfT credit for a body of quite progressive transport policies, that they are actually really pushing walking and cycling and major investments in public transport. I mean, we'd always want more. I want to see now. So that's really leveled up to per capita levels of spend that are available to London and the South East. It would be great if we had those, but we've now got a 5-year settlement for capital investment. And that allows us to plan and actually look at how that level of investment meets the big strategic documents that we've got, the Birmingham Transport Plan, and also the regional and local transport plan. So about that, I feel generally quite positive. And I think the main thing is certainly to maintain a positive relationship with this key government department, not having these hostility or conflict, and that's not at all what's come out of my briefings, because the PFI contract is incredibly complex, and we've got that really quite negative history of the exiting Amy, but we're moving forward, and I think the expectations that you're setting in the contract negotiations are high, and that's really important, because I know from our residents want to see the backlog of road repairs caught up with, and I know that from the perspective of the council leader, that's really one of his highest priorities. So it's really important that we get to a successful conclusion with these negotiations, but I'm confident of that one.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. A very lengthy overview of the department's responsibilities and targets. I'll start off, if I may, on the issue of the clean air zone. I've defended the clean air zone within my own party, of course. I always go back to working in Warsaw and coming over the hill at Great Bar, over the motorway, and seeing the cloud. And it's prevalent. Today is a nice day, go to Warsaw, go up to Great Bar, come over the hill, and you'll see the cloud of noxious fumes that we're all breathing in. And on that basis, I've always defended the clean air zone, and indeed, when I was deputy leader, I did whatever I could to progress the environmental agenda, purely based upon my own knowledge of what we were breathing in. And the fact that when I was a kid, and I've made this statement many times before, I'll make it again today. When I was at school, if one kid in the class had got asthma, that was unusual. Now, if you go into a class, particularly at infant level, at least 25% of the kids have got asthma. And it's all due to the air that we're breathing in. So, I support it entirely. The one thing that obviously does concern me is having the right staff to support what we're trying to achieve. And I've heard there's a lot of competition, and I think, Kevin, you mentioned ACS2 and the impact that is having on the staff. And I'm hearing this from a number of different organisations that I'm involved in. It seems to be siphoning off a hell of a lot of qualified individuals. I think we need to try and build up as much relationship with BCU particularly, because they've got the faculty of the built environment, and that's where graduates are coming out from. The only downside to that is we give them a job, we train them up, and
2 years later,
they're up the road.
Losing two.
I know, but
We went through that exact course.
Yeah. And I also know that you've had to introduce supplemental pay. When we formed the county council, we were faced in 1973-74 with the Coventry supplementary pay, the bonus that they had, because they had more or less the same problems, and it took a long time to sort that out within the employees. Coming on to more controversial things, having been supportive often like the basis of what we're trying to achieve. PFI. Unfortunately, Chairman, PFI did come up as an election issue, particularly for one particular party who were trying to put the blame for the PFI fiasco on the progressive partnership that we had. And I just really want to put the record straight that it was foisted on Birmingham by Gordon Brown, who wanted to get all public borrowing off the public books and onto the private sector. And I want to make that very, very clear right from the start. And Kevin was involved in it, and people recollect. And I know that the original contract that we had, the documentation from DTI and the initial contract that we had from Amy, the late Mike Wilkes was saddled with going through it, and it filled 5 reams of paper. It was an enormous contract. But what you have brought out today, and I think it is important, particularly for new members, and it's hopefully bringing them up to speed, is what we lose in PFI credits if we don't have a new contractor, because we revert to the grant system and we lose an awful lot of income. So I'd be grateful when you're answering the issues that I'm raising, that you do bring that out, because I think it's of paramount importance. The additional transfer of responsibilities to parking. One of the contradictions that we have in Birmingham is that, and we all see, I get constant complaints about along the A45 about parking, and yet people can park free on Tesco down at Sheldon, they can park free on Morrison's at Sheldon, but as soon as they park on the road, they can create problems for us. So enforcement is important, I think, but enforcement with a degree of humanity. You raised the issue of speed cameras and average speed, and I think that I would support. We've got it along the A45. It has been a success. I think we need it on side roads as well, because I was asked by my newly elected colleague before the election what were the 3 most important issues in Sheldon. And I did raise them, and I told him it was speed, number 1, number 2 was speed, and number 3 was speed. And we've had a particular problem in Sheldon because of the sprint development, and everybody's been ducking and diving and using side roads as rat runs, and speed has increased. So I think we do need to roll out the average speed issue as a priority. And verge protection, if we're going to get the responsibility, you know, Birmingham is very, very lucky. Largely was developed, the suburbs were developed in the 30s. And were developed as very pleasant environments with grass verges. And all we see, unfortunately, is being churned up, because every kid that's 18, it's a rite of passage now that you get a car. So if you've got 4 kids in a family, as soon as they're 17, 18, they get a car. So you go from 1 car to 4 very, very quickly. So I think we really do need to take that on. And the last point that I'll make, I'll end up with a bit of controversy, I suppose. Perish the thought. A38 Tom. I'd be grateful for some clarity on that, because your predecessor was talking about closing it and pushing all the traffic around the middle.
as a reminder that this is not a policy.
No, I thought we were supposed to be putting these people on the spot. With the Audit Committee, the Taxi Committee, it's an important issue because currently the middle ring road can't cope with the amount of traffic that's being pushed on it. And if we push more on it, we're going to create more and more problems. And I know because I use it, and it's from Bordesley round to Millennium Point, it's just a total pain in the neck. So it is an issue that we've got to look at, and we've got to look at it sensibly. So that's the end for the time being.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Councillor Clement, I'll let you take this question from direct from officers and say.
Possibly I would say this as the former chair of the sustainability and transport and scrutiny committee. That's a more appropriate discussion with the scrutiny committee. But I suppose I'd like to thank you for all the work that you've done on your campaigns. For example, the anti-idling issue that you've consistently raised in full council. You've played a really important role there. And yes, you remind us of the importance of the PFI because of the £51 million PFI credits that the authority gets every year. But for me, I've got in this cabinet portfolio, I want to see that we actually get the benefits in terms of the condition of the road of that investment. And I think that's the real demand from our residents. We all know as local councillors that people are frustrated and feel at risk sometimes on the roads because of the condition of the roads. We're making up the backlog. We've got a big investment programme. Is it 148 million?
That's over the last 3 years.
Over the last 3 years,
2023.
Yeah, so we're moving forward and making a lot of progress, but we've got to improve even further. But I suppose just from your comments, I have a slightly different view. I think every policy that we're enacting now on transport is about trying to reduce the number of vehicles because we cannot carry on planning for an inexorable growth of vehicles on the road. And yes, I agree with you, you can end up in a household where you've got grown-up children who are unable because of the housing market certainly to move out on their own. You can have a household with 3 or 4 cars. But we've got to try and challenge that notion of car dependency. We've got to offer people choices, good public transport and safe routes to walk and cycle because the city is already terribly congested and in areas where we've got lots of terraced housing where like the neighbourhoods where I live, we have simply run out of space for vehicles, and vehicles are getting bigger and bigger. So I was interested in the discussion about scenario planning because I think it would be interesting to sort of consider what would happen if people carry on buying extremely large vehicles. We have an increase in the length and weight of those vehicles. What it's going to do to the road condition. I think that would actually be quite an interesting thing to sort of do some scenario planning on. But I think everything we're doing is about trying to encourage mode shift and getting people out of their cars when they're travelling around in the conurbation. And that is the characteristic of a city that's got an integrated public transport system and safe routes for walking and cycling. It means that it's actually then convenient and pleasant to not spend your time sitting in traffic. And that's what we're moving around towards. And on the A38 tunnels, I think we see the future of those as part of a wider planning for the Snow Hill area. And I think what Councillor Zachary talked about was potentially repurposing them. Obviously, it became an issue during the election campaign, but now we need to look at their future in terms of the whole strategic plan for the city centre.
Do you want to just come back on a couple of those points? That's it. So I think probably just to say, if we didn't talk about grass verges at a council meeting with the next members here, there's probably something wrong. So, but as the cabinet member said, I've got no doubt Councillor Tilby at some point, as we do probably every year on this, we'll do some work with the scrutiny committee on what more we can do to do the grass verge protection. We put a limited amount of money through the capital budget over the past few years for local board members to provide for their own areas where they need grass verge protection so they can allocate it themselves. Perhaps again, on the point to see how far that continues, but at this meeting. But yeah, I think we're conscious it's an issue, and I say we do what we can, and we've tried to do what we can in terms of preventing that. I think, we like to think we do parking enforcement with humanity, but I do take the point is that occasionally my post back said we're not doing it. So we'll do it. We try and do parking enforcement in the right way, balancing up the fact, as you say, that we've got to keep places like Stratford Road free of traffic and moving traffic, and that we've got to and we've got to be fair and reasonable about how we go about it. But there's a balance as ever to be struck there in terms of parking enforcement. And just the final point in terms of the right to say, Councillor Tilsley, that there would be a massive difference in the PFI funding, the funding that we would have for roads if we did not have a PFI. Take circa 50 million that we get guaranteed through to 2035 as part of the deal we've got with DFT on the PFI. If we didn't, if we went back to the block grant that Councillor Tilsley described, it would probably be nearer between 12 and 15.
Well, it's just
it'd be far less than that. And that's not to say that's the entire difference. There are costs associated with PFI that also eat into that 50 million grant. So it's not the entire difference, but it would be a significant drop in the amount of funding we get. And that would impact on the services we can deliver and the amount of investment we put into the roads.
And that was the point that I really wanted to bring out for new members.
Thank you.
And anybody that's actually watching live to this engrossing audit committee, because I think it is so important for the condition of the roads and the pavements and the general environment that we have, that we would lose circa at least £30 million. And of course, Keir or whoever is a successful provider have got to make a profit out of the situation. One of the problems that we've had, and I've been responsible in the past as well, when contracts have come up, you've said to contractors, I think you need to sharpen the pencil a bit more. And of course, you end up with a situation where there's no fat in it for them. And we've seen what's happened with the Metropolitan Hospital because of that. Just not enough. And the Aberdeen bypass, I think, was one of the other contract contributors to the plan. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. Councillor, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. If we follow up just on the average speed cameras, so clearly that is a priority for officers. And I know the executive that we've made investments within our 5-year or 6-year capital programme around the infrastructure. The key piece of work, this has been subject to numerous questions, is the relationship with the police around the enforcement. The police, just to be really clear, have the statutory enforcement responsibility for speeding. I mean, Kevin, we've got the powers that we were talking about earlier, we can't do it without their help. And what we also need, the police as well, is a sustainable model around the ongoing costs. So maintenance of the kit and the cameras, etc. It's got to be, I can't just absorb that cost because, I've got finance targets, as Sarah and Becky, are well aware. So, I can't just absorb those costs. So we've still got, I think, some detailed discussions we need with the PCC and most likely the contribution cost for when he or she is appointed later in the year. But just give the assurance we're on it on the council side, that investment is already in our approved programme.
It's because we debated this issue actually in council in last year, I think, because I remember Councillor Zapp again, I think, talking about it. And you've got to remember that the budget for the old style speed cameras was removed in 2013. So all we've got is the average speed camera. So I think we should raise people's expectations that around that things are going to happen because there are all of those issues that Phil's outlined have got to be sorted out. But I'm still aware that the demand from elected members and from residents to try and move forward, and we need to sort out the enforcement powers of the police, but also we need the financial resources to actually maintain the system if we take on the enforcement responsibilities.
As an adjunct to that, because I get involved with the speed watch within my local community. If we've got a PCSO with us, somebody goes past at 60 miles an hour, despite the fact that they're on the camera, you can't nick them. If we've got a constable, because of the powers vested in the office of the constable, and they go past at 60 miles an hour, and they've got the speed camera, you can nick them. So there's a vast difference in powers.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that you're fully engaged with community speed watch, because we've got to try and tackle this as a behavioural problem as well, that people feel entitled to get behind the wheel of a car and speed. And I think we need to make that as socially unacceptable as drink driving or driving without a seatbelt or driving with the phone country, because the cars are useful to a point, and people need cars to get around, but in many scenarios, but if they're driven dangerously, cars are dangerous weapons. And I come back to just the horror of turning up to a meeting to be told that someone's died in a road accident. In the last couple of months, a child's been killed in Northfield. Somebody was killed on a mobility scooter on Ulster Road. You can see the fatality on Country Road in Smallheath, and then the accident, and the fatal accident on Pershall Road by the Royal Arms in Crossridge. We just, that's just a death toll that we shouldn't accept. And yes, we've got to look at the engineering speed cameras, but it really fundamentally comes down to how people behave when they're behind the wheel of a car. And we can all play a role in trying to raise people's awareness about this. And also, it's a shame thing, isn't it? Because you wouldn't go out now and boast about drink driving, whereas I think probably 50 years ago there may have been a sort of a joshing thing about having one for the road. And I think we've now really just got to say that none of us want to see anyone getting injured or let alone being killed in a road accident. And it's within all of our hands to put behind the wheel of the car to stop that.
Well, if you speed in the city at the moment, you are quite a wealthy individual accustomed to fuel.
Thank you. Can I bring Councillor Sanger? Councillor Cole, do you have a question? In which case, just Councillor Sanger, then we'll.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations, Liz, on your
Thank you.
Okay, talks about enforcement. When are we going to be seeing these new rules in place? Because you said 2023, when 2023, at the beginning or at the end of something. I know my colleague gives it enforcement with humanity. I beg to disagree. I don't think there should be any humanity in enforcement when it comes to enforcement. But that's that's another discussion. I think
Depends where you represent.
yeah, and some people are more extravagant, need I say more. But yes, we have this issue with the police / council. Council said it's not us, the police say it's not us, and we have that issue. So we need that more enforcement, exactly what's going on. I mean, we have red route, which definitely means zero parking, never load single yellows and double yellows, but that's not involved. So there are major issues that we need to think about, and that's where I need more enforcement. That's why I wanted to bring up when it is 2023. New enforcement coming, so with that really apply on the red route. And then we also have controversials within the inner city areas. There's not much enforcement, so they refuse to come without police backup. But in outskirts areas, the enforcement civil work officers work well. I know we have that 5 minutes, it's a 10 minutes discretionary to make them move, but when you see wait outside somebody's car, that 5-10 minutes can be surrounded by 50 people around you. So therefore, the enforcement officers are in danger, and I don't want anybody to put in danger. Somebody should be able to go out there, do their job. But so how are we protecting our enforcement officers who are out on the streets? And there are some areas where it can get quite dangerous. So whether they need police protection, do they need cameras? Can they not have that support like the PCSOs do, or the police do? So it's all that support. If they've got that support, have that regular maintenance of enforcement, then hopefully, at the moment, I'm finding that some of our areas, not mentioned any, are completely lawless. They can do anything and anything they want. They can park on a pavement, nobody's going to park on my page. They can go in the no entry sign, and the police will literally not say anything to them because it'll cause for points of issues because that witness and other stuff that's been gone through that comes right in front of purposely that come with the police, blowing the lights just to prove a point, and then just document the junction. Sorry, we can do that. It's that arrogantness that the drivers have to say we can do what we want. And that's where we need to be strict and say, you know what, we need to take no nonsense. If it's a bus lane, bike lane, we need that enforcement, and we don't see that. And that's where I need strict enforcement to make our roads safe. Our pavements are not safe for pedestrians. I've ended up putting bollards outside the school to make sure our pedestrians are safe. I can't do that. I look to do that in every single road. Make our pavements safe, because pavements are for pedestrians, not for bikes, not for scooters, not for cyclists, not for anything, and definitely not for cars, especially a 4-wheel car with 4 wheels on a pavement. Definitely no. So I need to see more enforcement, and I need Birmingham to be safe. When we've got so much traffic on the road that literally nobody's going anywhere. In another 5 years' time, nobody's going to be going anywhere. Also, I know, like that your item number 5 is worst case scenarios, this is probably going to be one of those scenarios is, right, roads are completely gridlocked. The bikes probably are right because they're probably using the canals and the scooters, but where are the cars going to go? They're going to end up being on the pavements, full of pavements of the pedestrians. So that's where your job is. I need to see our pavements safer. So that's one thing. I know we talked about driving licenses, Susie, from 17, 18. That's it. It's cultural. I know it's cultural to have a car at that age. I don't know what it is. We need to break that culture. We've got transport links. Majority of the areas have got really good transport links, but they need to be more regular. They need to be more better. They need to be more proud of, oh God, I waited half an hour for a bus and then we did 10 and I got 10 buses and I couldn't get in onto any of them. It's that culture we need to break. And then when you're outside a bus stop, you've got 50 bags of rubbish next to you. You don't really want to stand at that bus stop, do you? And wait 20 minutes for a bus. So these are the things we need to improve on. And then I brought here, if we can look into the government by age restrictions and let's change the 17. I know we're discriminating the young, unfortunately, whether we can make driving license from the age of 25. Therefore, that's given us a few years to get two cars off the road. And I don't know, that's food for thought for you guys. No, that's the youth stuff. So that's for you. For Bill, probably the clean air zone, where some of the wards are on the outskirts of the clean air zone. We've got cars that they're polluted cars are in the non-clean air zone and then they jump into where we're trying to go in. What support are we doing to protect the wards that are on the outskirts of the clean air zone? And then I know you can monitor it, but you can't physically see the zones. If I'm in a clean air zone, I'm right next to the non-clean air zone. How is that benefiting me? So how can we sustain the air everywhere we go completely clean, not just, I'm going to go there because it's safe and there, but you can't see it traveling around. So how can we, I know we've got it in certain zones. I want to see the clean air zone. But yeah, but that'll be a working problem for you guys. I know he needs my idea about VCU and graduates, and so I know we're working really well.
It's all right, I am a former chancellor, so I have the opportunity.
I'm aware of time.
Yeah.
So if we can.
Yeah, I think that's all it was, just vacancies and struggling and how we can apply local boards, and we've got local network neighbourhood schemes. We've all got open days and workshops. I don't know if it's worth having along and promoting all the vacancies that we've got to get, not just going to Aston on certain places. We can hold them locally to get one month. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Councillor Simon.
Can I just say, it's absolutely just inspiring to hear the passion and your passion on all of these issues. And I know from your social media feeds that you're probably one of the most activist councillors in working with the police to really clamp down on obstructive parking and all those behaviours that you've talked about. But I think it is really down to behaviour and people's sense of entitlement when they're driving. And I think that I don't think that trying to raise the age when people can get driving lessons and driving licenses, I think that would be, it's really controversial, and I'd probably say no politician wants to say it, obviously going to advocate that, but what we need to get to is appropriate car use and giving people choices, because at the moment, people thinking, get 17, learn to drive, and then you're free. Whereas I have found this in the time that I started cycling around Birmingham broadly since the pandemic, that actually that has liberated me to go lots of places and feel that I can get there safely and easily, and it's better for my health, and all those sorts of things. But then I also need to have the choices, when it's raining or it's cold or I'm too tired to use public transport. So it's not that. We need to move this away from it being seen as something negative or a war on cars or trying to undermine the local car industry, which we want to actually thrive and become the leader of green technologies. But actually, it's in a big conurbation where we've got public transport and lots of alternatives. We need to get to the stage where people's first thought when they think about a local area they're going to work is not to get their car out and actually think about how they can move around. And also, we've seen in the last 2 years that we can do things online through video conferencing, through Teams and Zoom, so that we actually need to start thinking about moving around less for certain activities that we do now. We need to actually design out some of the journeys that we're doing, because we are grinding to a halt in the city, and we've got to start taking that on. So I hope we clip out some of what you said this morning, because I think it would be some really good rallying call to residents in the city to think about how they travel around in those areas.
Thank you. Very quick response.
Yeah, very quick, just on the specific point Councillor Hussain raised there. Firstly, we don't know what time in 2023. It's still something government are being engaging with us about, but not really clear on the timescales for it. I think Councillor, as soon as we know obviously more about that, we can bring it back through the committee to update on what the progress of that is. I think the other two very brief points I made in response to all of that is that first, it is about behaviour. We can't enforce ourselves out of some problems, and we can't enforce ourselves out of all the parking issues that you've raised. And you've seen that yourself, you know that very. It is about behaviour. You can't be reliant on having 24/7 on ground enforcement. There are some things you can't enforce your way out of. And that probably brings us back to the item that is on the assurance statement, which is we can only meet whatever expectations you've got as members if we resource up for them. If Phil has the ability to be able to deliver certain schemes through with traffic offences, and if I have the resources to be able to deliver on your expectations, we're going to have to enforce them on the street. So that probably brings us back around to the assurance statement piece, Jim, in terms of that your expectations require that structural staff support, resource support from our side.
It's a very good point which to finish on, because I think that's one of the challenges that this committee has really realised over the past years, just how much we need to be resourced to deliver what we need, what our residents want us to deliver, and the impact of the current funding we have to do that. Well, in which case, thank you very much, Councillor Clements, and thank you, colleagues and officers, for attending today. We will look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future. I think there are a couple of, were there any follow-ups we really noted? No, I think we didn't have anything specific for you to come back to us on, but we look forward to seeing you again. And thank you very much for joining us today. And do feel free to stay with us if you wish, but we also understand if you need to go as well. Thank you very much.
Stay for the excitement.
In which case, so I'll just ask members to that we need to note that effectively note that report. So can I get the So we then need to move to the Birmingham Audit Annual Report 2021-2022, the report of the Assistant Director, Audit and Risk Management. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, good morning. The report covers the work of the internal auditor during the 21-22 financial year. You'll see in the terms of reference that you covered earlier that Action G was the committee's responsibility in relation to the internal audit. And this report asks you to discuss the competencies of the oversight overlay. So 21-22 was a year of recovery, reflecting after the 2021 year, which was quite disruptive to our work around, where we couldn't go out just to moving on visits and normal inspections. The most important part of the report is in section 2, which is where I did my annual opinion. It's that I can provide reasonable assurance on the core systems of internal control. And section 2 explains why reasonable assurance is as written every day. Section 3 will outline the areas where the teams have contributed added value over and above our audit plan. We talk about quality assurance in section 4, and that includes the inputs, the audit days, where we spent them, and the outputs for the performance of the reports. In Appendix B, we list out all the reports that we issued during the course of the year. We explain how we risk rate our reports, so a green level ones are good. Basically, in a red or isn't. Section 5 covers the work of the corporate fraud team. Later on in the year, you will have a specific report on the work of the corporate fraud. Section 6 points out that our audit charter has to be formally approved each year. The audit charter is the document attached to Appendix C. Then we go on the summary of our audit plan. The committee approved plan for 22-23 is March 20, but it's repeated in Appendix D. Yeah, it hasn't changed since it's approved. We talk about COVID recovery in section 8, and grant claims in section 9. In a very busy week for grant claims, with the bottom of the 30th of June deadline signed off this week. The list of the European grants is slowly reducing as we expected. Penny today gives you the summaries of the report that we gave the risk rating to. And then goes on to cover the work that we did in schools, on risk management and on their financial systems. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Colleague, that's Kelvin.
On the fraud set, has there been any repayment of frauds in relation to payment of a variety of housing benefits or other benefits that have been paid out by the city?
Can I come back to you on that one?
Yeah, because we've also got the COVID grants that have been paid out. And
Yeah, we'll cover it for the same time period as here.
yeah, okay.
Thank you, Councillor Tesley. But going through in section 4, the days again, because I know that we were aware of the impact that COVID had on your team and the ability to do things that catch up you then had to do. So take me through again the fact that the plan and the actual, there is a variance in terms of what you were able to deliver. So 341 days variance.
Yeah, so last October we introduced you to a new head of corporate fraud following the retirement of Neil Parkinson. So there was the variance on investigation in particular.
Right.
Mostly the list of sickness during the course of that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And as I can see on the internet, the outputs, the numbers of skill business and everything that particularly was able to get back to. Now, in which case, any other questions from colleagues? I think there's a lot more in this report, and I think perhaps we've got time to consider today. And I do wonder whether, again, as we've talked about utilising this for some kind of form of briefing for new members and maybe resetting and understanding what the importance of this report and how we as members can really engage with it, because it does feel quite a long and I know that we have the risk register is in colour now, so we can see the challenges, but it just feels to me that there is more that we can gain from this report, so that might be something that we can make for the future purposes.
I was just going to say, Chair, on that, can we have a bit more of a discussion on the risks, because they're all very high.
Yeah.
We can't really discuss that right now.
The committee normally gets a risk register quite on a regular basis, so we will see these risks coming up before us. And it's every quarter. It is every quarter we get it, and yes, you're right.
So we should have a separate meeting, just we can analyse the risks.
Yeah. I've just gone through a session in one of the organisations that I'm involved in. We've added deep dive into the risks, which took a couple of hours.
I think all this red scares me. Poor things.
Understandably, but we will have the risk register in front of us every quarter. Let's see how the next session with the risk register goes, and if we don't feel there is enough time within that, we can explore something else. I wouldn't want to kind of add to our reality agendas already without being able to see if that is sufficient for members to respond. But of course, do feel free if there are questions on those risks now to raise that.
There is a situation, Chairman, where if we're discussing some of the items on the risk register, that it might be as well to hold in private.
Yes.
To be honest with you.
And we can move into private.
I think.
Because one of the challenges of holding a briefing or a wider discussion that isn't part of formal meetings is obviously the decision making relative that meeting. So we can move into a private session for this discussion on the basis of the next. The next meeting for the risk register will be the That's it, John. So we will be back here relatively shortly to talk about it. So let's have a look at that and see from there. Okay, colleagues, can I then get noted that report on what we need to do? We need to agree that annual statement, do we approve the internal audit charter, which is set out in Appendix C. Appendix C, yes, of the papers. Can we get that approved? Can I get that approved, colleagues? Approved, thank you. External auditors plan, then item 10. John.
Thank you, Chair. And for members that haven't met me, I'm John Roberts. I'm the external audit partner for Grant Thornton. In the room, I can see Nicola Coombe, who's the senior manager, and Kirsty Lees, who's the manager for the audit, both with you in person. And I'm going to hand over to Nick shortly. And again, really for members that haven't sort of experienced external audit before, and particularly external audit in a local government context, if I can just sort of give the headlines of what that means. So we're external to the organisation, therefore we're fully independent, and we report with a view to reporting to other stakeholders than the council. So through that independent report, we're reporting to primarily to taxpayers, but also through to government and any users really of the external audit assurances that we give about the council's accounts, its financial position, and its and the value for money arrangements that it has in place. Now that also is something that's different from a private sector external audit. In the private sector, the auditor would just look at the accounts and pretty much draw the line at that point. Because it's public money, the National Audit Office prescribes the Code of Audit Practice that sets out how all external audits of local government are delivered, and that includes what's called a value for money code objective. And in that work, we comment on the adequacy of the council's arrangements for economy, efficiency and effectiveness, its financial standing and its governance, and that's all following an approach that's clearly and closely prescribed by the National Audit Office. The plan that you've got before you has been produced in the context of the high level things that are going on at the moment. So economic pressures, the impact of the economic downturn that we all know is coming on the council and its business, very much at the forefront there, along with how the world and the local economy is recovering from the COVID pandemic. And also more specific to Birmingham is the fact that it's a big year for the audit this year because it's changing IT systems. The value for money report was presented to the last audit committee, which was the previous year's value for money report. We will be producing a separate planning document for that, and we'll take members through that. So hold fire on the value for money section for now. Nick's going to talk you through the accounting risks that we use to tailor our approach. But just before she does, one word on where we're at with the previous year's audit of accounts, and those are on pause at the moment. They're on pause for every council that's accounts were outstanding because quite out of left field, really, a national issue arose about the valuation of infrastructure assets. So the conversation we've just had about highways and so on is very relevant to that. The tunnels, the bridges, and so on, all are valued and reported in the council's accounts. However, the code of practice that was prescribing how those were to be reported has basically proven to be impossible to implement meaningfully for councils, and SIPFA has consulted recently on emergency proposals to put that right. That catches your outstanding audit. Those proposals were discussed this week by an organisation called the SIPFA LASAC, which is the SIPFA's side of the organisation that sets the accounting requirements, and that has to be then ratified by something called the Financial Reporting Advisory Board, which meets today actually. So we should hear very shortly as to how and how quickly we can progress the highways assets point. Apart from that, all other elements of last year's audit are done. we do have to evaluate our position on a few errors and uncertainties and make sure that there is no material impact, and we'll be dealing closely with officers on that. But there's no further work that we will be doing in that area, but we will bring a final report back to members that will cover that further work and the highways infrastructure point. Nick, do you want to take us very quickly through the accounts risks, please?
Before we move over to Nick, for completeness and for the record, John, if I can interrupt, because mention is made on page 62 of Birmingham Airport Holdings. I have to declare a non-pecuniary interest as a director there and chairman of the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Tilsley.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. As John said, the plan you've got before you is one that old members might sort of be familiar with. It's not massively different to what you've seen in last year, but I will spend a bit of time for the benefit of new members. So our risk assessment is an iterative process. So while these are the risks sort of as we see them here today, if and when new issues arise as we go through the audit process, we will bring these to your attention as we go along. But the purpose of our audit, certainly from a financial statements point of view, is to be able to come to a conclusion as to whether the council and its group accounts are materially misstated or are free from material misstatement, I should say. So to that end, we take what we know about the council and determine where we think the risks of material misstatements might lie, because it's on those areas where we'll expend the most audit effort. Some significant risks are dictated to us by audit standards, so we've got no choice with those, and some are down to auditor judgment. So I'm going to spend most of what I've talked to you about going through pages in your PDF pack from sort of 65 onwards, which is where the significant risks are set out. So the first one I want to talk to you about is on page 66, which is about the risk of management override. So this is one of those presumed risks that I was referring to earlier. So all audits across the land will consider this, because the risk of this is presumed to be present in all audits. And this is the risk that management could circumvent the controls that are in place in order to achieve a particular outcome. And therefore, to address this risk, we have a particular focus on journals, which essentially is how sort of things get moved around within the ledger. And we also place a really big focus on estimates. So any estimates that management have made in the accounts, particularly those that are subject to a lot of subjectivity, there's a lot of assumptions and judgments in them, because it's through those estimates that a particular outcome could be achieved. And it's that focus that drives us to identify a couple of our other significant risks, which I'll come on to now, which is the valuation of the equal pay liability, valuation of the council's standard buildings, including its council dwellings, and the valuation of the pension fund net liability, which are all set out on the following 3 pages. Each of these balances are in the many millions of pounds on the council's balance sheet, and the methodologies applied in determining these valuations often contain many assumptions and judgments, slight tweaks in which could have a really sort of quite significant impact on the balance that the council is reporting. So how we set out in the plan is a number of steps that we'll follow in each of those instances to really get comfortable with the estimates made, the judgments that have been applied. And in doing so, where we feel it's appropriate, we'll also engage what we refer to as our auditor's expert. The council, when it values its buildings, obtains people with the appropriate knowledge and expertise in order to do that. So we do that on our end as well. If I go back to the second presumed risk that auditing standards require us to consider, and that is the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Again, it's a presumed risk in all audits, so this one is rebuttable. So if we decide it doesn't apply, we can say that it's not a significant risk, and indeed that's what we've done in this particular case, as well as the presumed risk of fraud related to expenditure recognition. Now, clearly, the council received an awful lot of income and spent an awful lot of money, so the fact that we've not identified these as significant risks does not negate that, the fact that we need to do an awful lot of work to get comfortable that they're not materially misstated. So there are sort of, we set out at a very high level how we propose to respond to the income and expenditure testing of the council's financial statements. And then moving on to page 69 of your PDF pack, which is page 11 of our report. While not significant risks, there are two sort of other matters pertaining to the financial statement audits, which I just wanted to draw to your attention. One is the impact of the council's move to Oracle. Now, clearly, because of the implementation being in April, that's very much more of an impact on the 22-23 financial accounts. However, part of our audit testing considers the completeness of the transactions in any financial year. So we will be looking at transactions subsequent to the balance sheet date to check that they have either been included in the 21-22 accounts where appropriate or excluded where appropriate. So we will be obtaining transactions from that Oracle system. So we do need to make sure that we can map it back through to SAP. So that is in train. And the second I was going to refer you to was the infrastructure assets, but I think John probably already covered that in a pretty sufficient amount of detail, because whatever conclusions are reached, over the coming weeks in relation to closing off the 2021 audits will continue to impact the 21-22. So that's all I was going to say, but happy to take any questions.
And before you John, launch into questions, I just wanted to round off with a comment on fees, and the sharp-eyed members will notice that the fees are to be confirmed in this document, and the reason is the audit fees are set by an organisation called Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, PSAA, and it's with PSAA that we have our contract. Audit fees have moved on significantly since the original contracts were let. So there is a process of discussion around reasonable fee variations to those contracted levels. And that's the process that we're involved in with PSAA now. There is a retendering of the contracts going ahead, which will then result in more sort of current and up-to-date fees, which will reduce the level and the need for a variation discussion. But we don't own the audit fees. We can only propose them, and then they are independently challenged, evaluated, and then fundamentally set by PSAA. So, we involve you fully in those, in the transparency around that, and we will be bringing to you, when we complete the accounts audit, we will be bringing to you the final outturn on the previous year's audit fees, largely for your information, because the actual statutory setting of those fees is done by PSAA, not by ourselves and not by the council.
Thank you. Thanks, James.
The PSAA are offered to come and do a briefing to the City Council as we run we are the largest stock authority. So an informal briefing to the Audit Committee, and I'll pencil that in Monday for October and November.
Thank you, that would be very helpful.
Yes.
Any questions for the external auditors? We just take welcome that report and we with interest and value the identification of those potential risks, and thank you for that. And I do think that we will need to continue. I think one of the challenges of the new committee is that we're going to need to bring councillors up to speed on the work you guys do and help to understand that. So any opportunities for briefings? I think, John, you offered at some point to invite the new councillors on this committee to come and have a cup of tea with you in your office over the way. I think that would be a very useful thing to happen if we could get that arranged as well. Okay. Excellent. Any other points on that item? In which case, can we note?
Can I just reiterate, because obviously this is about moving on with this coming year, but just to say, I think John alluded to, because we've been doing some work in terms of valuations on our assets, and that decision being taken today, we have not yet brought to this committee our statement of accounts, not yet had the opinion from external audit, so that's still to come. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And obviously now we are starting, we're in the process of doing our close down accounts, and obviously picking up all the other points as well. So we'll be feeding you to audit committee further. So you'll have this year, we're just closing down, but also the 5 year as well. So I think
No, sure. it has been a very long task, has it not? In which case, item 11 now, item 11 of which we've introduced a new way of doing this. We were quite pressured for time on this committee, it turned out we have been anyway. We were expecting Councillor Francis to bring her portfolio to us as well. And was that Councillor Francis was unable to do so, that has been rescheduled. But when we had the agenda looked very full, we've introduced, particularly with some items, the idea that we would not have a full presentation on the item. Instead, members will be expected to look at the item and then raise any questions directly on the item. And that we came up with a term for this, didn't we? It was for noting the sort of report. Yeah, for noting and inquiry. So this report is one of the first that we've kind of moved into that way of working, which is the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's Adult Social Care Disabled Facility Grant Complaint. So this is a complaint that's been received by the Ombudsman. They've written us a report, which is in the papers of the committee. That paper's some recommendations, and then the council has responded to those recommendations and needs to take away how it will improve its services with regard to that particular complaint. So I've got a statement to read out from the Adult Social Care Directorate. Graham Betts, the Director, sends us apologies today. I think John Williams is available. There's John. So if we have any questions, John will join us. If we don't have any questions, we'll just move to the fact that this needs to be noted. All local government ombudsmen and social care ombudsmen, indeed any ombudsman that the council engages with, reports need to be brought to this committee as a matter of constitution. However, sometimes these reports are there for noting an improvement, and then the improvement actions will re-emerge in the cabinet members' assurance sessions that we then go on to do. So note that the report, note that something's going to be done about the report, and then know that we will continue to keep a watch on this. So I'm going to read out this statement, and then if colleagues have any questions they'd like to ask, John is available to remotely answer those questions. So, summary of the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Public Interest Report concerning a complaint about disabled facilities grant complaint. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman issued a public interest report due to the significant fault in the way the council is handling disabled facility grants, DFG, and concerns this may be a more systemic issue. The complaint was that Mr. X complained about the council's handling of home adaptation to meet his son's social care needs. Mr. X said his building work is slow, poor quality, and is incomplete. He says this has impacted on his son's mental health and medical condition. The outcome. The Ombudsman found fault causing injustice, and as a result, a number of recommendations were made. Recommendation 1, personal remedy. For the distress and uncertainty caused by the faults identified and the significant impact the delays and lack of adaptations caused. And a second set of recommendations, service improvements to implement a disabled facilities grant policy, outlining the process for approving DFGs and outlining contractors' roles and responsibility. Also, staff are to be reminded the importance of accurate record keeping. And so therefore, John, did you, I think that, so therefore the report we've been given, and therefore the recommendation is that the Audit Committee notes the Director of Adult and Social Care's response to the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's recommendations. So John, did you want to give us a few minutes just on those recommendations?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So our commissioning teams and social work managers responsible for DFG have implemented a policy, and that's going through due process at the moment, and then that'll be signed off. That's been a significant piece of work that's taken a number of years to pull together, but has also been delayed because of the impact of COVID, where we've had to move our resources to help on some of the most vulnerable citizens across the city. The part that we've recognised within the work that we've done with this case is that we have builders that are working on behalf of the council. They do not always get on with the citizens that they're working for, and what we then see is a breakdown in relationship, which then creates problems. My teams then work, my occupational therapists work with the building contractors to try and remedy those issues, and that's where the communication part is very clear around where we haven't captured how we've tried to resolve the issues between the contractor and also the resident and tried to mitigate that risk. some of the work that we're doing as a result of this case, which goes back a number of years, is very much about how we work differently, how we set out our expectations, and also how we communicate our decisions and also any risk. We have seen, not just in this case, but in a number of cases where the residents will sometimes sabotage the work or the relationship, and equally so will the contractor. And we need to make sure that we have robust processes in place, and that's what my team are then pulling together. In addition to that, there's a significant piece of work going on at the moment, which is auditing our cases across adult social care. And that's looking at both social work interventions and also occupational therapy interventions, which will make sure that when we are then challenged by the Ombudsman, and rightly so, we can then provide the evidence that demonstrates the vast amount of work that goes into a case like this. In addition to that, we are working with the family to then make sure that they are able to complete the work, and we will be working around 3 quotes, but also we're being very clear with the Ombudsman that we have to do that with due regard to the public finances. This is not that we have a blank check for this individual to go and have a bespoke extension done. It has to be reasonable and within the cost of what we believe is right for that work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that update. And members can note that there are 2 reports attached to this item in our papers. One of which is the Ombudsman complaint, the second is of the information that we have been given by John there in terms of what council. Are there any questions related?
I think the only comment that I make secondly the motion that you put is that there does seem to be a breakdown between the relationship of the owner, tenant of the property, and the contractor, and the fact that it was a £60,000 contract means, in my book, that it was a pretty enormous contract to let over a long period of time, which is going to test the patience of anybody on the field. So we are where we are, effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. In which case, can I get that so that second, so that report is therefore noted. Thank you. Item number 12. Thank you very much, John. You can leave us now. I very much appreciate that. But we would look for an update onto any of those issues when we have Councillor Marion Khan, Mr. Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, her update to us. Make sure it's noted within that. Schedule of outstanding minutes, item 12. So we have, for new colleagues, we have a log of actions that the committee agreed to take away after a particular agenda item, and then we look for follow-ups to those within, if they are not dealt with within 2 months, they go red. If they're 1 month, it's yellow, and if they're dealt with, it's grey. As you'll see, we've got some reds and on the log. However, all of those are, some of those are to be updated by the 28th of September meeting, and some of them to the 19th of July meeting. And there's 142 adoption of accounting policies 21-22. Members requested that officers to facilitate a future training session in relation to the valuation process.
I was going to, given that some clauses, there are some options of looking at when we bring the 21-22 accounts here from as part of, and that might be like actually an evening session from 9, but I'll discuss that with something.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful. That would be helpful. Then we had 2 yellows. So tended to update on the members' request that future training session should be provided in relation to members' interest. Have you been doing that? Excellent. Can we have formal responses there when that happens?
Will do. Happy to do so. So just clarity that occurred shortly after the election.
Right. And did we have the consistency of attendance? And I'm continuing to pursue those there. Because given that this issue was raised with
it was part of the induction.
Yeah, but if there's a lot of members.
And I will say there's variable attendance, but I'll provide further details to the committee at the next occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the 2021 Auditor's Annual Report. Members requested the relevant service director and cabinet member responsible for the host, which has also set 10 future meetings to outline our concerns. How long will the external what are being addressed, and that will be covered at the 19th of July meeting. So I take that report as noted.
And Sir Tinder has done one-to-ones as well.
Yes. So therefore, item 13, dates of meetings for this term year are all there for members to note. Meetings will start at 2 o'clock unless specified otherwise. I'm aware that Councillor Clutton has joined us online, so not aware that this meeting started this morning, but so I do apologise about this. This was an exceptional move. So thank you, colleagues, just for noting those. Any other urgent business? In which case, the authority to chair and officers, in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair, jointly with the relevant chief officer, has authority to act on behalf of the committee. Can I get that agreed?
Agreed.
In which case, I declare this meeting closed. And thank you very much, colleagues, for your time this morning, and for those of you online who persisted with us so long. This is appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting, which will be on the 19th of July. Thank you, colleagues.